Good morning. Welcome to episode 62 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the water and drilling industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy, and this week in the news, we're going to talk about EPA funding for the Great Lakes and Michigan Drinking Water Week, talking about private water wells. For our feature story, we're going to jump into Minnesota and PFAS, the waters of the United States, and the Chamber of Commerce and how they're challenging that. But before we get into all this great content, let's talk some safety. For this week's safety topic, I want to talk about workplace distractions. We're leading into the start of summer with Memorial Day weekend. Got people that want to get boats in the water and have some barbecues. We're going to remember the fallen, all that they've given for us to have this great country. And we still have 4.5 days of work to get through. So as soon as you're done with this newscast, huddle your people up. Let's start having that discussion about what is safe. How are we going to operate safe? What are our tasks? When we get distracted, we get rushed. We forget things. We don't have the right tool. We just need to do this really quickly because we want to be wrapped up by Thursday evening. So maybe we can take Friday off as well. It's time to start focusing on what is going to distract our people this week. So let's get our tasks out. Let's outline them. Start talking about risks. Anytime we see anybody that seems like they're physically on site but not mentally there, it's time to call them out. The youngest person on site to the most senior leader who is leading the tempo for the day. It's all of our responsibilities to prevent these distractions. Statistically, we see the greatest amount of injuries happen leading into big holiday weekends. And man, we love the start of summer and cherishing all that we have for being a great country and our troops. So, what are we going to do this week? How are we going to execute effectively? Do we need extra checklists? Do we need to make sure that each of us have each other's back? It's very easy for us to get into situations where we want to roughhouse and be silly on site. And those can all lead to injuries. Let's make sure we have the right PPE. Let's make sure we're doing the tasks appropriately. And that when we lead into Friday morning, everybody is healthy, safe. We can have a great weekend. Be safe out there. Make sure we're staying hydrated. Let's take a look at the weather. Let's make sure we have the right PPE, the right tools, the right processes. And everybody, this is a time that we need to be able to say stop when anything doesn't seem right. That spidey sense goes off. Your instinct is one of the greatest safety devices you have. So again, let's be smart and safe and start this weekend off right. For this week in the news, the Environmental Protection Agency announced the availability of $30 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law for restoration projects that advance environmental justice in underserved and overburdened communities across the Great Lakes. I want you to think about all the Rust Belt cities and all the major manufacturing that has happened, and now these underserved communities on our Great Lakes and how great of a process this is. The EPA has just published a request for applicants for the newly created Great Lakes Environmental Justice Grant Program that will fund the implementation of environmental protection and restoration projects that will further the goals of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This is in communities with environmental justice concerns. Many communities in the Great Lakes Basin lack the resources needed to apply for, obtain, and oversee the implementation of federal grant projects. EPA's new Great Lakes Environmental Justice Grant Program will ease the administrative barriers by funding principal recipients who will help underserved communities effectively access federal funding for important local projects. If you're on a Great Lake, this is something that you need to be getting involved in. Go to the EPA.gov and check this out. In addition, this investment will encourage even greater environmental, economic, health, and recreational benefits for underserved Great Lakes communities, including those near severely degraded sites known as areas of concern. The EPA's Great Lakes Environmental Justice Grant Program was made possible by President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, which invests $1 billion in the Great Lakes restoration initiatives to accelerate Great Lakes protection. And this leads right into a great discussion when we think of the Great Lakes Water Compact and restoration and all the importance that we have going on. My home state of Michigan, where I was a Michigan water well driller for Drinking Water Awareness Week, Michigan held Michigan Private Well Awareness Day for private residential wells, which recognized that 2.6 million Michiganders depend on private water wells for drinking water, as well as the responsibility of well owners to properly maintain and test their wells. This comes from the state of Michigan. Michigan has over 1 million private residential wells. Drinking Water Week highlights important resources about well maintenance and testing found on the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Care for MI Well. And this is very important because we need to be explaining to our homeowners, again, with PFAS and lead and everything happening, that private water wells are safe. It's our optics, it's our responsibility. I ended up going to college full-time in the early 2000s because the state of Michigan, the housing market slowed way down. And at the time, before that, Michigan averaged 40,000 water wells a year for nearly 40 years. This is a very big deal. This is a big piece of water well drilling history and lineage. And Michigan is one of the top states in the country for this. And so we have lots of private water wells. So it's our responsibility, our optics, as we look at Michigan and the rest of the Great Lakes states, how we're going to treat that. And so the education that comes from MI Well says most contaminants have no taste, color, or smell. The only way you might know if you have a problem is to test your drinking water. Information on lead and PFAS are also provided to help residents learn what these contaminants are and where they come from, if they may be a concern in their drinking water, and if so, what residents should do. The water coming to your home may already be regularly tested for certain contaminants depending on your water supply. And that's referring to the rest of the state of Michigan that is on municipal water. This is a big deal. We're going to lead into our feature story about PFAS. But we, as an industry, again, I'm going to hit home on this. The optics on private water wells, they are safe if they're well maintained and have been constructed properly. And that all comes back to us having a good maintenance program for our customers and us educating our customers on this so that we don't end up pushing pipelines farther out. It's a great thing for the state of Michigan. Other states do residential home, private water well awareness. We need to making sure that everybody understands that when they're constructed with best practices and the state regulations by a groundwater professional, it is a safe source of water. Now, with PFAS and other things, do we need to ask them to test more regularly? Yes. For this week's feature, I'm going to bring back in the Great Lakes, the waters of the United States, PFAS, and the Chamber of Commerce. And these are all very important, integral components to our discussion this week. We're going to start with a statement from the United States Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit Court granted the Chamber's request for relief, halting enforcement of the new unlawful waters of the United States rule during our appeal. Under the court's temporary injunction, the EPA and the Army cannot enforce the rule within Kentucky and against members of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other businesses groups that challenged the rule. The rule is halted in 26 other states due to similar court decisions. The appellate court noted that several of the plaintiffs' members had attested to projects that would be affected by the rule. For example, a member of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce stated that 3 projects are likely to be affected and that fees associated with one project are expected to rise by more than 75%. The court noted that if members don't take steps to maintain compliance, they risk significant fines and imprisonment. Here's the deal, everybody. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is not a government entity. It was founded in 1912. It's the world's largest business federation. It represents nearly 3 million companies, 2,800 state and local chambers, 830 business associations, and over 100 American Chamber of Commerce are abroad. It's headquartered right across Lafayette Square from the White House. And the Chamber's mission is to fight for the interests of business and free enterprise before Congress, the White House, regulatory agencies, courts, the court of the public opinion, and government around the world. We need the Chamber of Commerce as our small business. It's a good thing to be a member. It's a good thing to be advocate. But we also need to make sure they have our best interests at heart and how we're going to discuss these things in the future. Many chambers of commerce work closely with the government, but they are not part of the government. Although they may consider the process of appropriately influencing elected and appointed officials to be one of their most important functions of advocating for their businesses. This is important to discuss because we cannot be confused by who and what represent us. It's an advocacy federation for small businesses, and it's very important to us. However, waters of the United States, these projects that are worried about permitting, we need to be looking at them by a case-by-case situation and basis. And I can't stress this enough that we can't just yank out and go back to Trump-era waters of the United States. We have to understand navigable waters. We have to understand in the amount of excessive rains, how we're controlling that release into those body of waters, because it will impact our groundwater. And that's where I want to go next. A new study finds exceptionally high levels of forever chemicals in Great Lakes fish. Just talked about 30 million for underserved communities. They're fishing in these bodies of water. We have to be thinking about this. There's $1 billion for Great Lakes restoration. We have the Great Lakes Compact. We share this with Canada. It's very important for us to be looking at how the waters of the United States, how this permitting process, how we're looking at these action items go. And it comes to this. Scientists say their review found eating one freshwater fish is similar to drinking water polluted with PFAS. It's at levels of 48 parts per trillion for a month of drinking water is what one freshwater fish is. They found that even one or a few meals a year would likely have a significant impact on your blood levels. And so it's really quite concerning in that regards that even very infrequent freshwater fish consumption could likely be a significant source of exposure. This comes from David Andrews, senior scientist with the nonprofit Environmental Working Group. The analysis of 44 fish species sampled, which included walleye, largemouth bass, showed the highest PFAS levels among 152 samples collected from the Great Lakes with the average concentration of 12,350 parts per trillion. Remember, the new ruling is 4 parts per trillion for drinking water. Levels of 13 PFAS chemicals are observed in the Great Lakes fish, averaging 11,800 parts per trillion. This is from Andrews again. It's not yet known what's driving higher levels in the Great Lakes fish. I can tell you what it's known. These are navigable waters. We have pollutants entering our bodyways. And our advocacy groups can't just be the Bass Fishermen's of America and Sierra Club. We have to be those people. Now I'm going to jump up into Minnesota, who is working towards being the first state in the country to ban PFAS. And this is called Amera's Law, which will allow only limited exceptions to the ban, such as firefighting foam used at airports and oil refineries and in protective clothing for firefighters. It will also require companies to disclose if products they sell in Minnesota contain the chemicals. The ban would take effect in 2025 for a long list of products, including carpets, cleaning products, cookware, cosmetics, dental floss, fabrics and fabric treatments, furniture, products for children, menstruation products, and ski wax. I want you to reflect on that. We know that we've found PFAS in fast food wrappers. It's in Teflon. It's in 99% of all organisms in the world. We have to limit this. It'll be interesting to see where we go with firefighting foam and those retardants and how that impacts. Now, what's beautiful about the name of Amera's Law is it's named after Amera Strand, who in 2017, at 15 years old, was diagnosed with a rare liver cancer caused by PFAS exposure in her neighborhood. Cancer rates were the highest in Oakdale and surrounding areas, particularly amongst children. This was her area. Water testing in 2005 and 2006 showed extremely high levels of PFAS and PFOA, which are CA chemicals. Amera was an advocate for stronger PFAS legislations in Minnesota, where she spent the rest of her life appearing in front of the committees fighting for the end of PFAS. She died on April 14th, 2 days before her 21st birthday. She was diagnosed when she was 15. I want you to think about that. Currently, Maine leads the country with the strongest roadmap to eliminate PFAS, and that's by 2030. But now, here's Minnesota, where we know this all started with 3M. We had Dave Schulenberg on. This is a big plan for them to implement these restrictions. I want you to think about this again. PFAS can be present in our water, soil, air, and food, as well as materials found in our homes and workplaces. This includes drinking water, and we're going to get into some bottled water studies, some seltzer studies later this year as the more information comes out. We look at that 4 parts per trillion limitation. It is found in our public drinking water supply. We have point of entry systems for homes, no different than lead. We do not have a remediation process. It's found in our soil near waste sites, at landfills, disposal sites, and hazardous sites, such as those that fall under the Federal Superfund and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act programs. It's in firefighting foam. It's in fire extinguishers. It's been used for training at Air Force bases and airports and shipyards and military bases. And we're seeing big plumes for this. Again, this is why we're advocating for more testing of private water wells. It's found in manufacturing for chemical production facilities that produce or use it. For example, chrome plating, electronics, textiles, paper manufacturers. We just talked about how it's found in fish. It's been found in organic and commercial produce. This is why Maine has some of the strictest laws and is moving towards the roadmap. It's the farmland that's been contaminated by biosolids. It's found in dairy products by animals that have been exposed. It's in food packaging, for example, in grease-resistant paper. It's in pizza boxes. It's in microwave popcorn bags. We've all been consuming this. And this is affecting our liver and our thyroid, reproductive systems, our guts. It's a bad situation. It's in household products and dust, for example, in stain and water repellent used on carpets, upholstery, clothing, other fabrics, cleaning products, nonstick cookware, paints, varnishes, and sealants. It's in personal care products, for example, in shampoos, dental floss, and cosmetics. It's in biosolids. In the 90s, we put a lot of biosolids on fields. We have to be having a bigger discussion on where these biosolids are going, what Great Lake they're upgradient of. It's a lot to be thought about here. We have to have a larger discussion, and we're seeing the lawsuits come out, but it's tough because we're not where we should be, and we haven't even gotten to the remediation process yet. This year, March, EPA took a key step to protecting public health by proposing to establish legally enforceable levels for 6 PFAS chemicals that are known to be in drinking water at 4 parts per trillion. And this was fulfilling one of the agency's strategic roadmaps for PFAS. I ask you to go to epa.gov and look at this roadmap. And then, as we've just talked 2 weeks ago, the EPA, through the Clean Water Act, took enforcement actions to address PFAS discharge at the Washington Works facility in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where all the alarms were set off, where the livestock were being contaminated and poisoned, and the people in the neighborhood. And everybody knew from the facility that PFAS were not safe. So, Chamber of Commerce, groundwater associations, big businesses, industry, it is our moral obligation to do what's right and eliminate these and eliminate the entry source and be looking at this. This is something that, as water well drillers and drillers for the next 150 to 200 years, that's right, maybe 300 years, we're going to be dealing with from a remediation standpoint, from a pushing pipelines standpoint, from not being able to do ground source geothermal in areas, or being able to construct the way we are because of these being Superfund sites from the contamination. What's the next set coming out? Obviously, we know Gen X's. We got a lot of damage that's been done to this planet, and we got to be better stewards. And it's not about halting general industry or the ag business with the waters of the United States. We need to be embracing it and realizing that that source is so important to us, from surface water to groundwater, and how they're interconnected. This episode's a little bit of a bummer, but we can do better, industry. And that means we, as the blue collar small businesses, part of our Chamber of Commerce, need to be having a bigger discussion with them. Thank you for joining us for episode 62 of the Driller Newscast. Check out thedriller.com. The May digital issue is out. We have articles releasing weekly. We got a lot of good things going on. We got some big conferences coming up with the South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee. We got to be advocating better for our groundwater and our Great Lakes and understanding the impacts that we've had and what we're going to do to move forward in this industry. I want you to have a safe and wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Let's honor our fallen, place those flags, take some time, reflect. Now it's time to protect Mother Earth. Thanks, everybody.